You're about to witness one of the most shocking moments ever caught on live political television. The highest-ranking judge in America, Chief Justice John Roberts, completely lost his cool. His voice thundered through the courtroom as he screamed at Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, trying to shut her down in front of millions. But what no one expected was her response. Calm. Cold. Calculated. And absolutely viral. No shouting. No panic. Just one line, delivered like a mic drop, that sent shockwaves across the country. This wasn't just a clash of power, this was a turning point. Stay tuned, because what you're about to see changed everything. It started with a question. Sharp. Unapologetic. Jasmine Crockett didn't raise her voice. She didn't insult anyone. She just said what millions of Americans have been thinking for years: why should the most powerful court in the country be above accountability? And then, it happened. Judge John Roberts, Chief Justice of the United States, slammed his gavel so hard the microphone shook. He raised his voice, not just to interrupt, but to scream. On live TV. You will not question the integrity of this court. He shouted. His voice cracked. His face flushed. The room froze. But Jasmine Crockett didn't move. She stood still. Calm. Like she was built for this. And with one sentence, she flipped the moment on its head. When men in power scream at women demanding accountability, it tells you everything you need to know. That was it. The quote that turned a courtroom meltdown into a global viral storm. Social media exploded. TikTok lit up. Millions of people, young, old, apolitical, suddenly watching, reacting, repeating her words. This wasn't just a moment. This was a shift in how power gets checked. And today, you're about to see it all, from the explosion in that courtroom to the aftershocks that changed everything. This is the Union Show. Let's get into it. It happened in a flash, but the echo is still ringing across America. The courtroom was packed. Cameras rolled. Tensions were high. On one side sat Judge John Roberts, the Chief Justice of the United States, calm, composed, and commanding. On the other side stood Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, known for her fearless voice, her unapologetic truth-telling, and a track record of refusing to back down, no matter who sat across from her. But no one expected what was about to happen. Crockett was midway through questioning the Supreme Court's ethics and accountability. Her tone was measured, her facts sharp, and her argument impossible to ignore. Then suddenly, without warning, Judge Roberts slammed his gavel down hard. The wooden crack sliced through the room like lightning. And then, he yelled. Not raised his voice. Not interrupted. He yelled. You will not question the integrity of this court like that. He shouted, voice shaking with frustration. The room froze. Reporters looked at each other in disbelief. The audience stiffened. Even members of the panel seemed stunned. Nobody could remember the last time a Supreme Court judge lost control like this, especially on live TV. But Jasmine Crockett? She didn't flinch. She didn't move. She just stood there, arms folded, face unreadable, calm as ever. And in that moment, something shifted. This wasn't just a hearing anymore. It was a confrontation of power versus poise. Ego versus elegance. And Jasmine Crockett was about to make history. This was more than just another viral moment, this was the start of a political storm. And everyone watching knew, something unforgettable had just begun. To understand why Judge John Roberts exploded that day, you have to rewind just a few minutes, to a moment that seemed routine but would soon turn into one of the most controversial confrontations in courtroom history. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett was speaking, not shouting, not accusing, just speaking clearly and firmly, about something millions of Americans have been questioning for years: judicial accountability. She laid out a pattern. A pattern where decisions were being made behind closed doors, where certain justices were attending private donor events, where conflicts of interest weren't being disclosed, and where transparency was more rumor than reality. Her line of questioning wasn't just bold, it was surgical. "How are the American people supposed to trust a system," she asked, looking directly toward the bench, "when the system refuses to be held to the same standards it expects from the rest of us?" She wasn't naming names, yet. She wasn't shouting, pointing, or grandstanding like many do in these televised hearings. Instead, she used facts. Precise language. Measured pacing. But the temperature in the room was rising. Not because she was loud, but because her words were undeniable. Judge Roberts, who had up to that point remained mostly still, began to shift in his chair. He furrowed his brow. Whispered something to the clerk beside him. Then leaned forward, trying to maintain control with a calm tone. "Congresswoman, I would remind you that this body is not subject to legislative intimidation." That was the first crack in his demeanor. The internet would later point to that exact sentence as the moment his composure began to slip. Crockett didn't flinch. "And I would remind you, Your Honor," she replied, "that oversight is not intimidation. It's a constitutional responsibility." That's when it happened. Roberts' face hardened. He leaned forward again, but this time, faster. His hand gripped the gavel. His voice rose. "You will not lecture this court." The gavel came down like a warning shot. A violent bang that made the microphone spike. The reporters stopped typing. The audience leaned in. Everyone watching at home sat up. "You will not undermine the integrity of this court with accusations based on political bias," he barked. And just like that, the courtroom, America's most formal and revered stage of justice, turned into a battlefield of restraint versus rage. The broadcast caught everything. Judge Roberts' voice cracking under the pressure. His sharp tone. The redness creeping across his face. His loss of control. This was the Chief Justice of the United States, not just raising his voice, but yelling at a sitting member of Congress. And that's why it was so shocking. Because if anyone in that room was expected to show restraint, it was him. But Crockett? She remained frozen in control. She didn't reply immediately. She let the silence speak for itself. She let the weight of Roberts' outburst hang in the air like a fog. And then, she looked at him. Slowly. Directly. And what she said next would soon light the internet on fire. "When men in power scream at women demanding accountability," she said into the microphone, "it tells you everything you need to know about who's afraid of the truth." Boom. Not a scream. Not a jab. Just a single sentence. Delivered with composure, confidence, and cold clarity. Roberts leaned back, visibly rattled. He had no retort. He simply stared, lips pressed tightly, eyes wide. There were no objections, no interruptions, just silence. Cameras caught it all. Within seconds, news outlets clipped the exchange and pushed it across platforms. TikTok flooded with reactions. Twitter erupted with trending hashtags. And on YouTube, the moment was replayed, remixed, and quoted by creators from every political background. What made it so powerful wasn't just that Crockett stood up to power. It's how she did it. She didn't match Roberts' volume. She didn't lose herself in the chaos. She proved a point just by keeping her voice steady while his broke. Political analysts jumped in within the hour. "What you saw today was the collapse of courtroom decorum, by the very man meant to enforce it," said one MSNBC host. Jasmine Crockett didn't humiliate him. He humiliated himself, and her response just made it unforgettable. For Crockett, this wasn't the first time she had faced confrontation from those above her in rank or title. But it might have been the most visible and most powerful moment of her congressional career so far. The courtroom had tried to silence her with noise. Instead, she answered with control. And now, the world was watching. When Judge John Roberts yelled, the country gasped. But when Jasmine Crockett responded, the internet caught fire. After the outburst, after the gavel slammed and Roberts' voice cracked with fury, there was a pause. A deep, tense silence. Not a soul moved. Not a pen scribbled. Not a single cough. It was one of those rare, raw moments in politics where time seemed to stop. And in that suspended second, Jasmine Crockett leaned forward, eyes locked on the judge. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't argue. She didn't match his tone. She did something even more powerful. She spoke with icy calm. Her voice was steady, clear, and deadly focused. When men in power scream at women demanding accountability, she said slowly, each word slicing through the silence, it tells you everything you need to know about who's afraid of the truth. Boom. Just like that, she flipped the entire narrative. The courtroom wasn't quiet because of fear anymore, it was quiet out of respect. Even her political opponents seemed unsure how to respond. Some shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Others stared down at their notes, realizing the moment had already spun out of the judge's control. Jasmine Crockett had done the unthinkable, not just silencing a Chief Justice mid-rage, but turning his own outburst into a symbol of weakness. And then came the internet. The viral storm began within minutes. Clips of the exchange were posted on X, formerly Twitter, TikTok, Instagram Reels, and YouTube Shorts. The 10-second snippet of her cold clapback began appearing in every feed. Trending hashtags exploded. Hashtag Crockett clapback. Hashtag Judge shook. Hashtag she did not flinch. Hashtag power versus panic. Hashtag mic drop moment. TikTok creators began adding dramatic music under her quote. YouTubers started uploading breakdowns titled, "How Jasmine Crockett Silenced the Supreme Court." The greatest one-liner in political history? Why Judge Roberts lost the battle before it began. Influencers, celebrities, activists, even comedians jumped in. One video with over 5 million views in 6 hours played the original audio, then immediately cut to a chorus of young women repeating Crockett's line like a rally chant. Another creator made an edit with slow-motion footage, turning Crockett's words into an empowerment anthem layered over orchestral music. And then came the remixes. Producers turned her quote into songs. Spotify playlists titled Crockett Energy started popping up. Edits with fire effects, courtroom gavel drops synced with bass beats, and cinematic overlays made it the most remixable moment in political media that week. But it wasn't just viral fluff, it hit differently because it meant something. Comment sections filled with emotional reactions. As a black woman in law school, this gave me chills. I've been in rooms like that. She spoke for all of us. That wasn't a clapback. That was poetry. That was power standing tall in the face of intimidation. My daughter watched that and said, "I want to be her." That's the kind of leadership we need. Journalists couldn't ignore it either. CNN aired a full 5-minute segment on how the courtroom hearing transformed into a viral leadership moment. MSNBC invited panelists to break it down as a masterclass in modern political poise. Even those who didn't support Crockett politically admitted, this was a defining moment. She owned it. And here's what made it even more powerful, Jasmine Crockett didn't celebrate. She didn't go on a media tour gloating. She didn't immediately post about it on social media. She let the moment breathe. She let the clip speak for itself. That silence made it even louder. By not chasing the virality, she made it feel real. Authentic. Unscripted. And the audience respected her for it. News sites began publishing think pieces like, "The Crockett Standard, Why Calm Confidence Wins Every Time." "When Women Don't Flinch, Crockett's Power Move Explained." "The Gavel versus the mic, Who Really Held Power?" And the real impact? More people, especially young voters and women, started paying attention to her work, her policies, her voice. This one moment sparked new followers, more engagement, and conversations that stretched far beyond politics. She wasn't just the congresswoman who clapped back at a judge. She became a symbol of restraint as power, of voice over volume. Her office later released a short statement. "I don't believe in disrespect. I believe in responsibility. I didn't speak to win a moment, I spoke because the people deserve accountability, no matter how high the seat." Mic drop. Again. In a world full of noise, Crockett's calm delivery cut deeper than any scream could. It wasn't just about what she said, but how she said it. And that's why the moment didn't just go viral. It made history. As the clip of Jasmine Crockett's calm yet devastating response to Judge John Roberts continued to dominate every corner of the internet, the impact of that moment began rippling far beyond screens and social media trends. This wasn't just a viral soundbite anymore, it became a national conversation. The morning after the hearing, news outlets from every side of the political spectrum led with the same image: Roberts mid-yell, Crockett mid-sentence, the courtroom frozen in the kind of tension usually seen in historical dramas, not real life. CNN opened their political roundtable with the headline: "A gavel falls, a leader rises." Fox News aired the clip multiple times but focused heavily on the breakdown in decorum, accusing Crockett of pushing boundaries. But even among critics, there was one undeniable truth: Crockett didn't yell. She didn't attack. She held her ground without ever crossing the line. In fact, a surprising number of conservative commentators admitted off-camera that Judge Roberts' reaction was uncharacteristically emotional. One legal analyst on a national radio show said, "I've followed Roberts for over 20 years. He doesn't snap like that." But Crockett's line of questioning hit a nerve, and the public saw it for what it was: fear disguised as authority. In Congress, reactions were mixed but loud. Some Republican representatives released public statements condemning the tone of the hearing, while others tried to distance themselves from Roberts' outburst, quietly acknowledging that Crockett kept her cool better than most would have. Meanwhile, her Democratic colleagues rallied around her. Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez tweeted, "Poise under pressure. Truth in the face of power." At Jasmine for US showed every young girl in America what strength really looks like. Senator Cory Booker posted, "There are moments that define leadership, not when you're celebrated, but when you're under attack." Jasmine Crockett led yesterday. Even international media picked up the story. BBC ran a piece titled "American Judge Yells at Congresswoman, Her Reply Goes Global." Al Jazeera called it "the congressional moment heard around the world." And in France, Le Monde simply described Crockett as "la femme qui glaçait la salle," the woman who froze the room. But the impact didn't stop with the press. On college campuses, law and political science professors used the exchange as a case study. In classrooms across the country, students analyzed the moment not just as a clash between branches of government, but as an example of gender, power, and professionalism. At Howard University, a professor of communications told his students, "This was a textbook example of verbal self-defense. Crockett didn't just speak, she controlled the room by refusing to react emotionally." That's how influence is built. Civil rights groups and women's organizations also weighed in. The National Organization for Women released a statement applauding Crockett for remaining unshaken in a moment designed to rattle her. Black Women Lead, a grassroots advocacy group, called it a defining moment for a generation of leaders who won't be silenced. And then came the numbers. Crockett's following on X, Twitter, jumped by over 400,000 in 3 days. Her official congressional YouTube page gained over 1 million views on her past speeches. Donations to her re-election campaign skyrocketed, with small donors from all 50 states pitching in within 48 hours of the viral moment. Even media appearances started pouring in. But in true Crockett style, she turned most of them down. Her office released a short statement. Congresswoman Crockett is focused on the work ahead. One moment doesn't define her, but she hopes it inspires others to speak truth with clarity and courage. That silence? It only amplified her voice. By not riding the media wave, she let the clip and the integrity of her words stand on their own. It wasn't about making headlines. It was about making a point. And while Jasmine Crockett went back to doing the work of governance, Judge John Roberts was facing his own backlash. Editorials from major newspapers questioned his judgment during the hearing. Legal ethics experts began analyzing whether his reaction crossed a line of impartiality. Even supporters began calling it an unfortunate moment of emotion, recognizing that yelling at a sitting congresswoman during an oversight hearing was not just unprofessional, it was historic, in all the wrong ways. In the days following, Roberts made no formal apology. But insiders reported that he was deeply frustrated with how things unfolded, and even more frustrated that the backlash had grown so loud. Because no matter what he said or didn't say after, the public had already made up its mind. One screamed. One stood strong. And the world knew who won. When the gavel slammed and Judge John Roberts lost control, it felt like a disruption. But now, weeks later, that moment is being seen as something else entirely, a turning point. Because what Jasmine Crockett did on that day wasn't just survive a public outburst from one of the most powerful judicial figures in the country, she flipped the power dynamic in real time. And in doing so, she showed a new generation of Americans what true leadership looks like under pressure. In the aftermath, people expected her to fade quietly into the background once the headlines cooled. Instead, she doubled down on her mission. Not with louder words or more aggressive confrontations, but with focused action. Crockett returned to Capitol Hill with a fresh wave of energy behind her. Emails poured into her office from across the country, messages from young women, students, lawyers, and everyday citizens saying the same thing. Thank you. You spoke for me. She had become more than a viral name. She had become a symbol. A symbol for anyone who's ever been shouted down. For anyone who's ever been told to watch their tone while speaking the truth. For anyone who's ever been challenged not on their ideas, but on their right to speak them. That's what made this moment resonate. It wasn't just about politics. It was about power. Roberts' outburst was about control, and Crockett's calm reply was about reclaiming it. She didn't meet his fury with fire. She met it with something more dangerous to fragile power, composure. And people noticed. Civil rights leaders praised her not just for her poise, but for keeping the focus on the issues that matter: transparency, ethics, and the growing need for real accountability across all branches of government. Political strategists quietly began whispering what once seemed unlikely. If she can handle that kind of pressure with that kind of grace, what else is she ready for? And while Crockett made no formal announcements, the buzz around her future began to build. Not just as a congresswoman, but as a potential senator, governor, or even beyond. What people saw that day was not a viral stunt. It was a leader being born in real time. Behind the scenes, allies began building coalitions to support the kind of reforms she had called for, pushing for judicial accountability, clearer ethics rules for the Supreme Court, and stronger checks between branches. That one sentence, delivered so quietly, but so powerfully, was now being quoted in campaign ads, protest signs, college lectures, and even sermons. When men in power scream at women demanding accountability, it tells you everything you need to know. That wasn't just a quote anymore. It became a banner. Across social media, merchandise began appearing with her words: t-shirts, mugs, posters, even journal covers. And all of it grassroots, designed not to celebrate a viral moment, but to empower a larger movement. But through it all, Jasmine Crockett stayed grounded. In a follow-up speech weeks after the incident, she said, "I didn't come to Congress to go viral. I came here to do the work, to ask the questions that others are too afraid to ask, and to speak for those who aren't allowed in these rooms." And maybe that's exactly why the moment landed the way it did. Because we've seen angry debates before. We've seen people yell and point fingers. But what Jasmine Crockett showed the world was something rarer. Strength and stillness. Power and precision. She showed that true leadership isn't about dominating the room. It's about owning your truth, even when the loudest person in the room is trying to drown it out. Judge Roberts may have tried to assert control with volume. But Crockett took control with vision. And whether you agree with her politics or not, there's no denying what she achieved that day. She stood tall in the face of power. She didn't flinch. And in doing so, she won something bigger than an argument. She won the attention and respect of a nation. Now, every time someone watches that clip, they're reminded of what's possible when someone speaks truth with dignity and refuses to be moved by intimidation. And that's a legacy no gavel can silence. In a world where power often screams, Jasmine Crockett showed us the strength of staying silent until the right moment. She didn't just win a debate, she shifted the room, inspired a movement, and reminded us all what real leadership looks like. And right here on The Union Show, you just watched it unfold, raw, real, and unforgettable. If you want more moments like this, where truth hits harder than any shout, make sure to like, subscribe, and share. We bring the heat. You bring the voice. Let's build this movement together.